Soon recording. All right. So just to recap again, in Grafana 7, a lot of what we did was front-end streaming abilities that sort of from a data source API, you could refresh the data and that would flow down to update a graph. In 8, that now works also from backend plugins, that there's a new API that's extended to push that out so that you can send a stream to Grafana core and it will broadcast it to all listeners of that channel. So here is a, so this is data coming, in this case, we're aiming at trying to do 20 hertz. What you see here is a very slow moving GIF of that, but that's an idea. So this streaming infrastructure allows us to do both kind of data streaming, which you would expect from Grafana, but also allows us to start thinking about some new types of applications. So this was a sort of quick hack at a, trying to build a Trello style board where you have multiple dashboards and want to move panels around and see real-time updates between multiple clients, right? So standard stuff in 2020, right? The other part that this is working for is within Grafana now, when you save dashboards, that action is broadcast to everyone that's there. So saving a dashboard actually updates it everywhere else, like many other applications. But I want to also acknowledge Alex on this. So huge part of this is we're using a project, it's called Centrifuge, which Alex wrote. That's a Go-based WebSocket library. That's now part of Grafana core, and he's on this call, and you'll talk to him a bit later. You should check out that project. It's quite popular. So some of the system that we're looking at is sort of how to get data into Grafana. We've always had this path where Grafana queries data, but this is looking at how do we push data into it and what can we do with that data once we have it. I'll come back to some of these ideas. So within this streaming idea, you'll see everything that we refer to has a channel. And a channel is really just a string that specifies a stream of data. And in that, in this new API, we've got that specified into 3 compartments. There's the scope, a namespace, and a path. So the scope is kind of who owns that, like which part of our program is in control of that. And that's going to be either Grafana, so the core of Grafana. It's going to be a plugin, so a single per plugin ID, you can control a namespace. And then also per data source. So each instance of a data source has its own namespace. So within that, a namespace would be, for example, in Grafana, it would be, we have a whole area dedicated to dashboard events or to data source events. Plugins, that one's open to itself, that any plugin can kind of control what happens under its namespace. And a data source, the namespace would be the ID. Path, again, that's sort of further down. So Grafana, for a data source or for a dashboard namespace might be the dashboard ID, and then events can be based on that. So so this has, actually in addition to this, there's the org ID. So this is prepared for the multi-tenant setup. So there's also an org ID that's transparently shoved in front of there. So within the Go side and within our API, you'll see that we have a channel that everything that we're writing to gets prefixed with scope, namespace, and path. Our gRPC interface, this is a new API added in 8. And we'll walk through this a bit more, but there's a callback when someone tries to subscribe to a stream. So you can respond and say what you should do, whether they should be allowed in or not. And it also allows you to send the first request back. And then there's another call called run stream that is called once so subscribe stream is here. So you get back a call and you get to say whether someone should have access or not. Run stream is another call that lets you say, given data, I want to, you can essentially set up a singleton process that will continue to handle that stream, and it gets killed once there's nobody listening to it anymore. So it's important to know that this is like a multicast system. So as long as someone is listening to it, you have one instance of your run stream on a channel. So one query comes in, and then everyone who's listening to it is getting the same results, which is nice so that you're not, issuing new requests for everyone on a channel. So from the data source side, this is actually kind of nice. So all we do now is from a normal data query, if you return the channel address that you want to point to, which is literally in your query response, you set the frame metadata to be a channel. So which channel that should connect to. You get essentially the initial request comes through. So a query that returns all the data, and then each update gets returned by that channel. So each, the interval that channel pushes data out is then appended to the initial query request. Part that's pretty nice about this, here you'll see that each message you'll see comes along here. If you inspect the WebSocket communication, there's a long list of values spitting out there. What's nice about this, the front end work on this is the whole front end implementation, and this all kind of comes out of the box. So if your back end tells it which channel to connect to, the front end will manage connecting to it and appending the data to the stream kind of automatically. Let's simplifies that. So in sort of for today, the things that we can look at for like working data sources, there's an initial MQTT implementation that would be great to check out and get some feedback on. It's got a pretty basic support for a topic structure that expects a time and a value, right? A topic with a time and a value. We can read that. Again, pretty early support on that. This other one is the signal generator that we've been using to generate, essentially to help stress test our platform. And again, that's one that you can check out for examples of how to work with this. Then, as we're preparing for the V8 release, we're working on some tutorials that I'll walk you through in a bit. Let's see. So now to get to some more exciting stuff, I'll switch over to a live demo. So that's what I showed you, was kind of how you would work it from a data source level, but that may be a little overwhelming if you aren't building data sources, right? So we also have, I gotta get out of present here. All right. So let's see. So the other thing we have is essentially now in V8, Grafana itself will accept telegraph line format. So if you push data to it with an HTTP post, we can show that. So let me create a new dashboard. All right, I'll add a panel. I'll switch over to the Grafana data source with live measurements. And here I can pick which channel I see here. So the list of channels that populates is kind of what it's seen in time. So you'll see, let me pick the system one, and I'll go to the last 30 seconds. And maybe let's do a table view for, actually, we'll do table view here. All right, so you see I've got 1 point here. Its value is 3. In this window, I've got just a Postman client where I'm sending influx line protocol to API, live, push, in this case, example. That's, you'll see my stream that's set up here. And we can change this to 4, send, and you see this value updates with 4, 5. Oops. Oh, what am I showing here? Yeah. So let's do a table. Free. So each update gets pushed and appended to that system. So that's kind of nice because it essentially requires no updates to your core, and you can essentially pipe your data to Grafana server, and it will broadcast it to everyone listening on that channel, which is kind of nice. And this leads us to, let's see. So the next part is that if you're using Telegraph, you can essentially broadcast your Telegraph output to that channel. And I'm going to pass things over to Alex now, who is going to show how you can connect a Telegraph instance straight to Grafana and stream live data to it.
Yeah, hello everyone. So, do you see my blue terminal?
I do.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so what we will do now is running Grafana and running a Telegraph, which will stream some real-time data to Grafana time series panel. And in addition to this, we will show how we can send metrics from local Grafana to hosted Grafana. So let's run Grafana. This is not yet available in V8. This is just, we have just started working on, posting to Grafana doesn't work in V8, but all other stuff will be available with V8 release. So Grafana running. Now we have a Telegraph. Let's look at its configuration. So every 1 second, we will send CPU information to Grafana. So we are using local Grafana instance, WebSocket protocol. This is also possible to push using HTTP output plugin of Telegraph, but here we will use WebSocket. The WebSocket output plugin not yet merged yet into Telegraph, but we hope it will very soon. So here we are using a custom branch of Telegraph with WebSocket output plugin. Yeah, and with admin token, we will send an influx format towards Grafana. Let's start Telegraph. Yeah, here we see that we have some data pushed in. Let's look at panel. Yeah, so CPU information, and here we filtered it by usage user measurement. And what's interesting is that we also output this to hosted Grafana in lower resolution. As I said, output to hosted Grafana not yet ready for V8, but we will work on this to improve it and introduce at some point in the future releases. To demonstrate how it actually reacts on changes in CPU, let's put some load on the system. Here is a small program that does some math, and for 10 seconds, it simply increments counters and loads 6 of my 12 cores on this MacBook. So let's run it. And so here we see a reaction, and it also appears in hosted Grafana. And as you can see here, the data is much lower resolution, and here we almost instantly see the changes on the system. Let's do it again. Yep, so pretty much it for this demo. Guys, do you have any questions regarding this, maybe? No. Okay. Ryan?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
So the difference between using WebSocket and the HTTP output plugin, you're saying that it can be in a high resolution, or?
Yeah, actually, you can use both a ready-to-use HTTP plugin, which is already part of Telegraph, or WebSocket plugin, which we hope will be a part of Telegraph very soon. The only difference is that WebSocket output plugin should put a lot less load on Grafana instance, because HTTP output plugin sends every request, and every request uses all Grafana middlewares, which we have pretty a lot of, while WebSocket just connects to Grafana and streams data over TCP connection. So the only difference is performance, I believe, but regarding functionality, both are identical.
Okay, oh, sounds nice. I'll have a look at your pull request. I'm one of the maintainers of Telegraph, and so I will look to push some things forward.
Yeah, that would be very nice. So we are waiting this. So thank you. Cool. Ryan, you are on mute.
Alex, can you stop sharing your screen?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been the Telegraph plugin, I think, has been approved 1.5 times, and I think it's pretty close. Oh, Alex, now you're on mute. So
not saying anything.
Great.
Yeah, just keep inside.
Yeah, so the need for the WebSocket plugin really comes in to try and do higher resolution. At low resolution, it doesn't matter that much. So as far as just a periodic HTTP push, the performance is fine. It's only when you bump up the resolution. Any other questions or thoughts or desires on sort of how to get this out there? We're very excited that in 8 this has been around for a while behind a feature flag and not, totally ready for prime time, but in 8 it's out of the box enabled for everybody. It's now part of our core API. So it's stable enough that we can add to it. So the more feedback we get, we expect a lot soon. So
is it all available in version in beta 2, or is it going to be in GA?
It is in beta 1 and beta 2. So there's a bit more solidified in between beta 1 and beta 2, but it's all there. I think some of the error checking processes have been modified, but
yeah, I think the most noticeable change between beta 1 and beta 2 is that we are now looking at channel symbols, so allowing only specific symbols from ASCII, alphanumeric, and several additional symbols. It's still not documented yet, so we are going to document this before June, I suppose.
Yeah, I think documentation is our next, is the big missing piece.
I saw that you already updated backend example. So is it something we can already started to use?
You can totally use it.
Final.
Yeah.
I have a couple of use cases I want to try.
Awesome. Yeah, and if you run into issues, let us know, and we'll see what we can do to make it easier. The other thing that added, if you are writing plugins, is the instance manager. Has always been, I'd say, overly complicated to try to have a backend plugin that knows when the instance setup changes. And so we had to manually do that. The new backend example uses a different flavor of that takes care of it all for you. So you just never think about it, and it manages the closing itself and sort of calling a new instance as part of its normal workflow. That becomes much more important with streaming, of course, because for run stream, there literally is one process that we want to keep open per channel. So we were noticing issues with not closing it accidentally, or if you change your data source settings, it wouldn't close.
If the plugin already works with version 7 and in version 8 you will have a streaming capabilities, how you can understand that it's available, right? Because plugins, they can be used in 7 and 8. So how we can see that it's available?
So the streaming part of it just won't work in 7. That's like the query. If you stick channel on your response header, 7 won't do anything with it, where 8 will. There's various tricks in your plugin to say, to look at the Grafana version and add new elements to the UI. But it's sort of up to the plugin developers to figure out how they want to manage, 7 and 8 independently, or which features show up in which versions.
Right, because for me, it's became a real challenge to support 7.2, 7.5, and now version 8. And you always try to figure it out. And I mean, it's part of my workflow. Every single change I do, I verify at 7.2, 7.5, and then the latest master.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's I wish there was a better answer, but you can't go back in time with these APIs, which is why I've been pretty cautious about pushing out this streaming support, though it's been there in a certain form for a long time. I think it's in a state now where we're pretty confident that at least this initial round of APIs can stick around and be stable. I mean, you will notice, I'd say that back-end APIs have been pretty stable over the years. It tends to be the front-end kind of usage of them and how things move around. The UI elements are what really get you into trouble from version to version. So.
How does the performance look like? I saw that when you have a streaming enable in the version 7, when it's accumulating a lot of data, it's actually started to lag in on the front end. Have you verified that, especially with a high frequency?
We have put a lot of effort into it. I mean, your mileage is going to vary, I'd say, but we've put a lot of effort into, in particular, the switch from if you're using the graph-based panel. So Leon's on here. Internally, we have the CPU for the plot-based graph panel just could not handle getting updated. So we've essentially replaced that with a uplot-based panel, and done as much kind of optimization as we could around throughput on that. Leon, if you want to say anything here,
well, I switched over to my phone, so maybe you can hear me now. I don't know what's up with my mic. But yeah, so yeah, the performance is not just simply from switching the visualizations, although a big part of it is that we also optimized to not do there's also middleware layers, I guess, on the front end where it does a lot of transforms potentially. There's a whole stack of things that it does, and then it uses the React to pass everything through. So there's a lot of that we now bypass, and so there's a lot of stuff that has been removed for the streaming case specifically. So before, I don't know, Ryan, you were saying, what was the max that Slot was able to sustain previously? Something like maybe 2 updates per second, and we're now able to do 20 updates per second. So for a lot of cases, we're much faster. But you'll have to try to push the same stuff through version 8 to really find out for your use case. But it should be much better.
Yeah, I'll say we've done what we can so far. I think there's still a little room, but we've improved. I mean, previously it would work, but your CPU, you'd set your laptop on fire, right?
Right.
And so this is just all of these features. You can kind of, as well as they work, you just ask them to do more stuff, right? So it's this trade-off of how do we increase that limit but not let you hurt things too much. So for streaming updates, we've currently got a process that if your CPU, like if the refresh rate isn't keeping up, we just stop rendering. So it can get choppy, but we try not to freeze the system, which is what was happening before. So.
Right. Thank you. Because when we did the streaming in Redis plugins, we kept it to only 1 query per panel. I didn't want to support more because it started to lag it. And now I have a couple of feature requests that people want to have more than 1 query in a panel. And especially when you have 6 panels, it became a nightmare. It's so slow.
Yeah, no, and as soon as people have these features, why stop at 6 panels when I can have, there's no limit to the number of panels I can have. But
So one thing that's still true right now, and even in beta 2 that just got tagged today, is if you have the legend enabled, it may be significantly less performant. So hopefully by beta 3 or definitely final release, we'll put in more optimizations to have, if you have a static legend in a streaming scenario, that it should not impact performance. But right now, if you disable the legend, you'll probably be able to squeeze a few more frames out of it.
Okay. Thank you. So still there is a problem when you should support dashboards for version 7 and version 8, because if you switch the time series, right, which is not available in previous versions, it's harder to manage, especially with enterprise users. You cannot say there is a new time series panel, you have to switch to 8.
Yeah, that's true. But it's also hard if you're, we also have to prepare for the future some too. Like I'm super sympathetic to sort of how long it takes to build those things, but we also need to fix it at some point. Like the Angular Flot-based panel is not gonna last, and we gotta. So what is nice in many ways, like what we're doing with 8, is kind of actually using the infrastructure we put in place for 7. So the whole fields where you have a data frame where each frame configuration attached to it that applies kind of regardless of which visualization you use. That was always kind of a weird thing because the graph doesn't use it, right? So the thresholds you set on the graph panel are actually different than they are in every other panel. So in 8, all of our core panels now use those same concepts and use them consistently, which, you know, for Redis, for example, the parts that are super nice is you can push out as part of your query response, you can push out many of those front-end visualization settings, like the units, the thresholds, etc., and have your visualizations just work out of the box. So,
Thank you.
I got a question about the WebSocket. I'm not an expert in WebSockets, but from what I understand, it sometimes can be difficult. There's some challenges specifically with horizontal scaling. I'm just wondering if you've already worked through some of that, what your thoughts are about
it.
Do you mean what kind of problems specifically do you mean?
Just like an upper limit of number of connections, like per instance, or I don't know. I'm not really keen on a lot of that stuff, so I've just some things that I've read.
Yeah. So regarding WebSocket scalability of WebSocket, so WebSocket should be mostly supported on every system throughout all browsers these days. You already you need to tune number of allowed open files per process to handle more connections with WebSocket. So I suppose we will write about this in documentation. But in general, you can expect that thousands of your users, or maybe 10,000, should work fine with current implementation on one Grafana instance. So, of course, every WebSocket connection will cost some memory, some RAM on server side. This is about 30, 50 kilobytes per connection. And we need to say that regarding high availability setups where you have several Grafana instances behind load balancer, we still need to do this after V8 release. So currently we are concentrating mostly on introducing streaming for single node Grafana, but we know that some have several Grafana instances behind Nginx, for example. So we will come with some high availability solution later. Most probably it will be based on Redis, since the library which is used for WebSockets inside Grafana Centrifuge works with Redis natively.
And when he says that it's not supported for high availability, the big caveat to that is the plugin support will work. The one issue is that each node manages its own stream, right? So a request comes in on a channel and each node in that would have to fulfill it. So if you're doing something that's like periodically querying your custom system and spitting out data, it just means that for each node, it would independently be serving the same data versus only one instance for the whole cluster that gets broadcast. So plugin streaming should work in an HA setup, but this telegraph-based system where you HTTP push into it, that won't work right now because it will just broadcast to whichever node you happen to connect to and whoever happens to be connected to that same node.
Right. There's some questions in the chat. Sorry.
Where?
So I don't think we maintain streaming data right now, Alexander. I don't think that we cache anything on the back end of that. If you refresh the dashboard, where the streaming data will be maintained, correct?
No. The initial data can be loaded from plugin, for example, from data source as initial data using query. But at this moment, we don't have a cache of streaming frame on Grafana site.
Right.
We may have in the future, as soon as we will see how people use streaming, since we actually have this possibility with Centrifuge, but we have not enabled it.
But for these, again, for plugins, each plugin gets, when someone connects to a channel, you're able to send the first request. So plugins can manage their own cache. And for example, the Telegraph flavor of it, we do hold on to the last point that we have is saved in memory. So when you connect, you will get the last point that was sent there, but we don't hold on to the whole history, just the last point that was sent there. But each plugin, oh, go on.
No. Yeah, sorry, I thought you were doing.
Yeah, each plugin could implement sending the first frame.
The calculations, I believe, still work fine, right? They would just be slower. Maybe they would slow the stream down as far as the.
Are you talking about adding transformations that do calculated fields?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Will the alerting works with the streaming data?
No, the alerting is based on the query response. It doesn't sit there and listen to the response. So alerting is based on query.
Then there is the streaming which is available in version 7 has this advantage that you can actually do streaming and alerting at the same time. This is what we actually recently did, because we still, I mean, if your data source returns any data with a time and it's can stream on the front end, you can actually do alert.
Yeah, but you're essentially implementing that by a poll loop, right?
Yeah.
Right. So that's the main. So the advantage, I guess the approach in this streaming is literally that it's the backend is sending one request and broadcasting it to everyone, versus previously you could have stuff that looks like streaming, but it's really some version of polling. I will say the alerting story for Grafana is pretty complicated. It touches all sorts of things and has so many stakeholders involved. I am looking for the IoT use case of having essentially the thresholds that are configured as we do streaming, comparing those on the back end and having an additional channel that essentially advertises changes in state to your threshold. It is a very small step from there to have that be into the alerting system, but given all the changes in the alerting system right now, that's some time away.
Okay, because I mean, I think it's very, very useful. You don't see the streaming data all the time, but if the alert happens, you can get notification, right? You go there and you see what's happened.
Exactly.
And do you support all the panels? Because you demonstrated on the table and time series. Can we stream logs the same way?
Yep. It is.
Many data frames.
Everything is data frame based, so there's nothing special about it. I'd say we have been optimizing performance on the graph because that's like the most challenging, but different visualizations have different visualization challenges, right? So our focus has been on the graph panel.
Is it also possible to do some calculations on the received streaming data?
It's through transformations, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
This stuff falls exactly into the same pipeline that we've used before. I'd say the one major caveat is with streaming data, like if you don't set an explicit minimum or maximum, we have so many pieces of the system that sort of pick colors based on the range that, like, if that's required to get calculated with each update, that slows down performance significantly. So
Yeah.
I hate the "it depends" answer, but sure, there you go. Awesome. So yeah, give it a try. Let us know. Still a little more time before we 100% freeze it as an initial release. But, calculations. If you does the streamed data in the panel disappear on refresh, or is it maintained? I think currently it disappears on refresh.
Yeah, I think we already answered this.
Okay.
Yes, so we don't support streaming cache on the backend at this moment. Only over call to plugin.
We've had versions of this, and I think there's a good chance that we can support this on the front end. But mainly that was based on having a cache that survives navigation and the like. Because obviously, for a refresh, you're disconnecting and reconnecting to the same stream. But if we're already connected, shouldn't we just stay connected? So we've looked at in early implementations, that's what we did, but it got a little unpredictable on what its behavior was. So we went for the most predictable, which is a refresh connects and starts over. Cool. All right.
Do you have anything else for us?
That's it. That's what we got for you. If that's not enough.
It's saying possible features in 8.1 plus preview.
That was what Alex showed with
this one? Okay.
With I'd say everything that we talked about where Grafana server processes the data and does something with it. So what he showed was we receive it, we send it to the dashboards. That's in 8. But in 8.1, we'll look at taking that and then sending it to Grafana Cloud, perhaps taking it and sending it to the alerting system, having an additional channel that's running it through transformation or running it through the thresholds to have an additional channel based on the status, stuff like that.
And how do you do the authentication? I saw the bearer token, but who is generated for?
So in the HTTP push flavor of it, in this version, we said, send an admin token and you can write to these streams. I suspect we're going to need something a little less, less extreme than giving an admin token to Telegraph. But as a first step, that seemed appropriate. For plugins, you get a callback when someone tries to subscribe. So at that stage, the plugin gets to decide whether they can allow it or not. So plugins can manage their own authentication on that level.
I have a different questions, but I mean, it's all related. I saw that you did some changes with the JSON format that now you can send with JSON and data frames. Can you talk about it?
So as part of our effort to increase the streaming performance, so backend, we've sort of standardized on Arrow as just like a common industry standard format of like, we should be able to support stuff that's in there. In 7, I sort of as a shortcut, we ended up, well, we were trying to send the arrow frames to the front end, and somewhere in there they got base 64 encoded and sent to the front end, which is this sort of massive, very ugly, super not performant structure. But given that it was kind of half of the data sources used it and half didn't, it worked. It worked fine enough. In our effort to increase streaming, we explored kind of what is our best approach here. So could we do a binary arrow? Because arrow is pretty good. It is a streaming format, but it's really made to stream, you know, megabytes, gigabytes of data between systems, not, you know, not a couple lines to your browser. Like it's not its sweet spot. So after going through a bunch of things, we settled on kind of what are the most efficient things from JavaScript, which is, you know, JSON, and came up with a sort of JSON representation of this arrow frame. So that should be transparent to your users. It should be an implementation detail of how Grafana gets its data from the back end to the front end. But plugins still send their data between a plugin and Grafana core. That's the same, it's all the same protocol that it was before.
Can we just send the data frames as a JSON?
What do you mean?
Or so I mean, sometimes data frames are not easy to parse. You have to go do the two arrays, and there are multiple iterations how you should parse this data if you're working with the custom plugins, custom panels on the front end. So if you receive just a JSON data like a normal REST API, it may be easier to deal with it, or it's going to still be.
Yeah, so you now get a JSON payload, but it's still converted to a data frame on the front end. So again, if you just use the standard response handler, it manages the parsing for you. So you can inspect the payloads and you'll see that the format now separates out like what the header, so schema versus the data. But I would strongly recommend trying to work with that format directly, because we're aiming for that to just be our optimized format from back end to front end without a commitment to that as the kind of major format. So
okay.
But yeah, that change, we sort of did a huge performance push a month back, and one of the things I'll say that I'm super excited about for 8 is you won't see the loading spinner anymore. Like, you may see it, but it's not part of the normal loading process. So no more bouncing logo.
Yeah, so we have like 40% less megabytes pulled across the network on first load now. So it used to be, I think, uncompressed around 11. Now it's uncompressed around 6. So, yeah. So it's, lots of dependency cleaning, lots of removing of unnecessary stuff.
And time series panel, it's out of the beta, right? In version 8. And
It's
the graph
in 8, it's the default. It's
the default. Do you know what is the lifetime to support graph panel? One more release?
Major. I suspect it's going to be around for a long time, but my suspicion with it is that it will exist, like continue to work, but it may not be an option to create new panels with it, just because there's so much stuff that kind of exists using it. So we'll see what happens with it. Similar to the table panel, the old table panel still works because people need it and we can't break everything, but you have to work really hard to create a new panel to use it.
Okay. Do you have examples how to use new components which is behind time series?
New which?
New this component which is new graph component, which is which is used by this panel. How to use it properly?
So my answer for that is don't. In 8, there's a new so rather than trying to use those components directly, because they require so much prep and they're pretty finicky on how they get used, we have a wrapper for embedding a panel, because I assume you're looking at in an app, I would like to put a graph there, right? So rather than trying to do all the component bits, you can just embed the panel in your, so there's a panel Chrome element where you pass it your data and your panel configuration, and then you can use it in your app.
What if I want to create my own panel with this component? My case is I have this data returned by the plugin, and this data is actually I want to process it. And transformation won't solve my case because I want to have a previous values and the new values, and based on that we'll create something. And then so I have this panel already, and I put it on a graph, right, which is not kind of supported old one. So how I can use the time series? So I can just use the new time series inside my panel with my edit boxes. So
you're talking about within an app or within?
It can be an app, right? We're talking about the panel, my custom panel, and I just want to show some edit boxes and graph based on this data.
Yeah, so there's a panel Chrome where you can take essentially the time series panel and give it data and your configuration, and it will render as though it was that panel. So that model seems a lot better than trying to have components that aren't, really are not designed to be sort of end user facing components, where we do really care, like, what is the API that we have for a panel of, like, these are your JSON options for that, and pass it this data and this config, and it should work. So I would strongly recommend looking at the panel Chrome. So you may have a panel that all it does is embed another panel after changing its objects, and that seems fine.
So I can search in documentation for panel Chrome.
Panel Chrome. I think there should be. It's actually one of the things I'm most excited about for 8 as well, because it helps clear up this, like, how do you use these components that have so many interdependencies? Like, how do you do that reasonably?
Okay, but you still can use UI components, right? And then for the inputs, for example, and then to display it inside your panel, you can use this panel Chrome, right?
Correct. Yeah, but all I'm pointing to is these ones like the time series panel. Like, getting that set up properly is nearly impossible, right? Like, some of them maybe are reasonable, like the gauge component. Sure, you can embed that directly and we can make a component for it. But as we make these components that are more and more interesting, like the bar graphs and the like, do we focus on those as like a component library? And I would argue no. Like, what we really care about are panels and their structures. Like, if you're looking for a component library, that's when you use use AntD, there's plenty of libraries that just take those. But the panel library we really need to care about, which is where I'd say if you want to embed stuff, you can embed panels within itself. So.
Okay, thank you. I will try.
Awesome.
And it's in version 8 only, right? In version 7, we still have to use components.
In version 7, yeah, use components. So again, what's nice about this is with panel Chrome, you're insulated from changes to the component libraries, right? Like both it allows us to sort of treat the components a little more accurate to how they are. Like, we want those to be as efficient as possible and well designed. they're in a weird state of like both internal and external next to each other, and it's hard to know. Like obviously our button libraries shouldn't change. As long as you import a button, it should stay the same API. That's pretty different for, say, time series of like what and how we want that to work.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. Awesome. Great. Anyone else? We'll call it a day then. All right.
Well, thanks, guys.
Great.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to your presentation at GrafanaCon.
Awesome. Great.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.